Next question is, what were your major takeaways from this clinical?
Um, yeah, so definitely when it comes to clinical stuff, I took I was kind of almost surprised by the amount of focus and attention that can be placed on every part of like a session when you have the one-on-one hour of treatment. And it's not that you necessarily have to have that much time, but you guys all do such a great job of being extremely purposeful in everything that you do.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of my podcast. It's been a little while since I've done one, but I'm excited to have Harry Fischer here. Just a little bit of background information about Harry. I'll let him dive into the more details. Is that Harry was one of our students, and we actually recently brought him on to work for us. So it's kind of been exciting for Harry just to go from being a student, and now he's a coworker of ours now. So yeah, I'll let Harry kind of provide his background just about where he's from. But welcome to the show, Harry.
Thanks, Wesley. I'm excited to be here. I was a student at Healthy Baller starting this past January. So I was there for 4 months, which is awesome. But I'm from Virginia Beach, Virginia, so not too far away. I went to Old Dominion University for PT school down in Norfolk. It's kind of weird. I don't have one of those like injury stories that got me into PT or anything. I just kind of I took an anatomy class in high school and loved learning about how the body works and everything, and kind of went from there. But yeah, I had like a pretty good journey of education where I was able to tech a lot and really kind of learn on the fly before PT school in some pretty good clinics, and I got going from there. But
Cool. Awesome. And yeah, Teddy, Harry went to the same school as Teddy for PT school. So I think that helped maybe a little bit in him getting the clinical rotation with us. But Harry,
in there.
yeah, it worked out for you really well. But Harry, can you tell us a little bit about your kind of your clinical experience with us? I know that a lot of students, we're obviously in a unique environment considering we are cash based, and the fact that 80-90% of our patients are high school and college level athletes, and the rest of them are really really active adults. So we see a very kind of niched demographic. But yeah, can you just tell us a little bit about your experience and maybe how it was different from some of the other rotations that you did previously?
Yeah, absolutely. It was I was super excited to come here. Obviously, I was as soon as we found out that we had the clinical available, I was like locked into getting it. And so I also knew coming in that I was kind of underprepared. I had 4 weeks of outpatient experience clinically before I came to Healthy Baller, so I was like a little nervous about that, and definitely the first 4 to 6 weeks or so were a bit of a kind of like the fire hose situation. But it was super fun at the same time. And so yeah, that experience just really I was like fully immersed. So it was definitely super intense, but extremely positive as well. It was a situation where I was being put on the spot and challenged a lot of the time, but we had a lot of productive conversations and a lot of learning opportunities that I never got anywhere else. And being able to spend time with people and being really involved constantly with the types of injuries that we see at Healthy Baller and with younger athletes, having repeated like diagnoses, like seeing a bunch of ACLs and seeing a bunch of shoulder labrum repairs in like baseball players and football players and stuff like that. Having the repeated exposure to those things and not seeing like 5 knee replacements and maybe one athlete afterwards is like it just provided me with a lot of reflecting opportunities and a lot of ways that I could learn, I think, more quickly. I think after that 6 weeks or so, I was really able to start to develop a lot more quickly after I was exposed to everything and learned from you and Teddy and Drew. It was super valuable and a lot of fun too. It was a little intimidating at first, but I had to kind of be comfortable with being wrong a lot, which was cool and pretty hard, but ended up feeling really good once I was more comfortable. So
Yeah, I think that even students who come to shadow us, it's a very unique environment. Especially us who like I've been with Healthy Baller for over 4.5 years now. So at this point, it's just like a family. Like kids come in the door, you're that new kid on the block, and everyone's like coming in. They know, me, Wes, Matt, Teddy, like they all know our names, and then they're like, "Who's that guy?" And a lot of the athletes who have been with us for 2, 3, 4 years, they're like they'll know instantly who the new person is, and you were that person for quite a while. But now you've obviously been with us for almost 5 months now at this point, probably even over 5 months. So people know who you are now. So it's kind of cool just to see how far you've been able to come. One
Yeah.
follow-up question I wanted to ask about, like what you said, the learning experience. Can you share like maybe some of the difference that you had between us and then some of the other facilities? So like maybe specifically what you felt like really helped you to, you said the first 6 weeks was really daunting. Can you talk people through about what helped you get over that hurdle?
So one of the biggest differences, there are a lot of obvious differences, right? It's a big like giant facility with 40-yard turf field and squat racks and athletes everywhere and strength coaches. Those are like the surface level differences. But the biggest difference for me when it comes to any clinical rotation, whether it's my hospital ones or anywhere else, is the effort that was put into my education by all of you guys. We would sit down and have conversations for 30, 40 minutes sometimes in the middle of the day and just talk about stuff from the day before. I'd sit down with Teddy sometimes and he would have a Google Doc with all the stuff he wanted to talk to me about from the day before, which was like I didn't even know that I needed. So it was like that kind of thing where I was constantly reflecting, constantly seeing little ways where I was able to improve. And even where I got to a point where I would get through a whole treatment session, feel okay about it, and then have a few little things from either you or Teddy or Drew where I could kind of improve and take it to the next level. It was never like, okay, you have your patients now and just treat them and you're good. It was always, there's a lot of focus and attention placed on taking the next step every week.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we really harp on. I was the first hire at Healthy Baller Physical Therapy. Obviously outside of Teddy, and we had meetings every week, sometimes twice a week, of just like sitting down and talking very intentionally about whatever the topic was, or maybe a specific patient that I was struggling with. And Teddy's had that basically that open door policy from the beginning, so he kind of put that on me. And ever since then, it's crazy because we went from just me and him, and now we're up to 6 therapists now, and hopefully more to come in the future. And also students that want to come in the door, and we're really big on just like educating and basically doing things the right way, as opposed to being like, "Hey, Harry, here's your 6, 7, 8 patients a day. See you later." Because I felt like at the time, a lot of times when I was a student, like I had some direction, but it was never like specific, like one-on-one or two-on-one mentoring, whatever it was. And you were in a very unique situation because you basically had three different CIs. Like between me, Drew, and Teddy, we all treat relatively similarly, but we all have our little things that we do that might be a little bit different that you were able to kind of pick up on, which I feel like is probably a unique experience in itself, that you had essentially three different CIs. And I will say, as a CI, like what I wanted to share with students, a lot of times students, whenever I do a Q&A on my Instagram, one of the most commonly asked questions is like, what should I do to prepare for my next clinical or my first outpatient clinical, whatever clinical it is. And I think something that really stood out about you, Harry, was the fact that you came in like very prepared. And it was outwardly noticeable from all of us, not just obviously me and Teddy and Drew, but even Alyssa and Sweezy. Just recognize how prepared you were. You had your notebook that I made fun of you for, but it had all your notes, and that was how you took notes on your patients and how they progressed, and just writing down things for the next day. And I think that really stood out to, honestly, all of us, the fact that you were so prepared, and like honestly, you took feedback really well, which I feel like is super important for students too. Like we all have our own biases, and maybe you might not agree with every single thing that me, Teddy, and Drew did, but like hopefully for the most part, you understood why we did things, because we do try to be very evidence-based and exercise-based, especially for these higher level kids. And I think that was something that, as a CI, for any student that's listening, that I really liked about you, Harry. And even though, we joked around a lot about like, I told you from almost day one, I was like, treat this as an opportunity as a stepping stone to wherever you want to go. For you, thankfully, it turned into a job at Healthy Baller, which is, it's not common, but it's a cool thing, and to be honest, like if you weren't a great student, I can promise you that we wouldn't have hired you. Like Teddy and I and Drew, we talked a lot about like, we're very particular about who we bring on, because we're not a massive volume company, so we can't afford to bring on 12, 13, 14 therapists. Like we have to be very, very selective. But yeah, like essentially you did what we were hoping for, and you kind of rose up to the occasion. And we it was cool because we literally got to see you like improving your confidence like every week. And like first 2 or 3 weeks, you were kind of that quiet guy. And then like, okay, slowly started to open up a little bit. And like by like week 7 and 8, you're hopping in and joking around. And I think it was really cool just to see from a CI's perspective. So again, for all you students, like be prepared, ask questions, take notes, show your CI that you are engaged, especially if it's a setting that you like really, really want to work in, like Harry did. You have no idea the type of impact. Like, I don't think Harry came in with a mentality like, I'm going to definitely get a job. He was just like, I want to come in, make the most of my 16 weeks and learn as much as I possibly can. And he did that. And thankfully, the big, massive cherry on top was that he got a job out of it. So yeah, definitely a cool story. And then Harry, my next question is, what were your major takeaways from this clinical?
Yeah, so definitely when it comes to clinical stuff, I was kind of almost surprised by the amount of focus and attention that can be placed on every part of like a session when you have the one-on-one hour of treatment. And it's not that you necessarily have to have that much time, but you guys all do such a great job of being extremely purposeful in everything that you do. I've just been in a lot of PT places and a lot of places I've seen. There's a lot of thought placed on things, but there's a lot of filler also. And I think that I really learned how to like think about every decision that I was making in a clinic, like every warm up exercise, every progression. I was thinking about like what do I want to get out of this exercise or this intervention before I even started to do it. And it took me a while, I think, at the beginning of the clinical. Like it was like that was one of the hardest things to really be consistent with, I think. But that was a huge takeaway for me. Is having focus on every exercise, and even not necessarily making prescription decisions, but seeing how a person reacts to each and every treatment or exercise, and being able to adjust things every time, and not being like giving a person a set of exercises and knowing they can do them and kind of backing off for a minute. I think that's something that you guys all do extremely well, and something that I have felt like I got a lot better at and still have to work on a little bit. But yeah, that was probably my biggest one. Just the purpose and the intent behind things.
Cool. And I didn't know your answer. Obviously, we didn't go over these answers ahead of time, and that's kind of a really cool answer because I'm really big on being purposeful and intentful with your exercises. I think that with the boom of PT Instagrams nowadays, like there's so many exercises and philosophies and whatever it is out there, and I think sometimes as a new grad, and I to be honest, like I probably would have done the same thing. Is that you're just like, wow, that exercise looks really cool. I'm going to use it with said patient tomorrow without understanding like the why behind it. And I'm really big on people understanding like this is why you do this because it works on whatever, fill in the blank, as opposed to being like, wow, that looks cool, or this is Instagram worthy, whatever it is. And we don't do any of that kind of stuff. It's like we want to fill in that hour with basically the intent behind what we're trying to work on, right? And I think it's really important for me, and I'm glad that you learned that, to be very purposeful behind it. And even like for me, small things of like, you think about a more traditional PT setting, if you only get 30 minutes with the PT and then you walk in the door and you tell them you get on the bike for 10 minutes, 33% of your session is spent on a bike, which is crazy to think about. So even for us, like a lot of times, like maybe we'll do it for a 5-minute max bike ride. If a patient's like, oh, can I bike longer? Like show up 5 to 10 minutes earlier, like I don't need to watch you ride a bike. I don't want it to eat into my hour-long session that I have. So like little things like that, I feel like go a long way as far as like producing what we believe to be the best product of physical therapy out there. Not to say we do everything perfectly, but we do the best we can to put forth our best effort to like just maintain a high quality and to obviously get good results. So I'm glad that you were to pick that up. And of course, for me being the ACL person and seeing so many ACLs, and I think that maybe you were even surprised about my volume of ACLs and percentage of my caseload. I think one day you were with me, I think I had 8 patients and probably all 8 were ACLs. But I wanted to ask you, what were some of the major things that you learned about ACL rehab? Not just from me, but also from, Teddy and Drew also have ACLs, but as a whole, what did you learn about ACL rehab in your, rotation with us?
I think one of the kind of the most interesting and fun things to develop in during that whole progression is the return to run phase, and like the actual progression of force absorption and loading mechanics and stuff like that, and not I kind of had an idea about the time thing where it's not like 4 months and you run, but I didn't realize the whole process of the landing and the like low level plyos and all of those kind of things that build up into an actual run, and how that process goes, and how important it is to wait until somebody's ready and test strength like meticulously, and be really detailed in that process, because it just seems like before you learn stuff like that, it's like, oh well, they're by 4 months, it's healed enough to be running, like, so it's like stuff like that. That was kind of a fun thing initially, but the definitely the biggest thing is what you talk about super often, is the return to sport phase, and how detailed that phase really is, and how important it is to be really really good with that phase, because there's nobody tests well enough. There's so many places and patients who don't get tested on the metrics that they need to be tested on, and we obviously, you guys do a great job of doing that at Healthy Baller, and you've kind of set that up really well. And learning about that and seeing it repeatedly and seeing how important it is firsthand when somebody's like really close and they have the strength but not the power, the rate of force development and stuff like that. Which I'll also add on is like just the sheer importance of the strength conditioning principles, and like learning what like force and rate of force development and pulse and all that means, and how it relates to a sport and stuff like that. That kind of blew my mind at first, for sure. But that was a huge part to me.
Yeah, it's I'm really big on, we talked about intentionality earlier, and I think that there's just so many details in ACL rehab that like basically have to be addressed. And if you don't address them, your patient is whatever X amount of percentage more likely to be injured. If you miss, obviously 5 details, they're going to be more at risk versus 1 detail. And it's really important to just get every ounce of that, because you're trying to rehabilitate arguably one of the most difficult injuries in the outpatient world specifically. And there's a lot of things that get missed. So yeah, that's why we're so big on testing. And right before we hopped on, like, we're about to expand soon, and Teddy literally was like, we're going to have a specific area designated for testing, because we see a pretty high volume of ACLs. Like, all of us have ACLs. Between all 6 of us, all have ACLs on our caseload, multiple ACLs on our caseload. So it's like we recognize the importance behind that, and we are trying to combat that, national whatever average of 20 to 30% of people suffering second ACL tears. And thankfully, we, knock on wood, we've been able to bat a pretty good percentage. But I think it basically comes down to the fact that we don't allow people to go back until they're physically and mentally ready to go back. And that comes with thorough testing. And I think that's part of the problem, is that, some places even still rely on just isometric testing. And unfortunately, that's just not enough. Like, isometric testing is great. It gives you some sort of baseline, but unless you're testing some sort of power concentric, like, it's just, and ideally even eccentrics, like, it's just not going to work. So we've had to figure out ways to test that. And there is no, at least without the biodex, there's no perfect way of doing it. But I think having some way of testing concentric and eccentric is going to be ideal in the future moving forward for any facility that sees a lot of ACLs. But I also wanted to ask you, was there a specific ACL patient that sticks out to you, and if so, like, what about them? Was it a conversation, or was it a difficult case? Things like that. In any of the 3 CIs that you shadowed, just anyone that stood out to you.
Yeah. I had a lacrosse player about midway through who came in basically for a quick return to sport test too, because she finished her rehab and was just getting tested so she could go continue to play lacrosse. And I tested her, and she was, I think her quad ISO was around 70%. Her single leg jump was in the 60s, and she was just absolutely not ready to be on the field safely. And the initial conversation, I was kind of excited but nervous about, because I'd seen you have the conversation probably 20 times already, and that other people also. And so I kind of was able to talk to her and her mom about what all that meant, and how much more that she needed. And it was really exciting after that, because you could tell a little bit where the spaces were in her rehab that were a little bit getting missed, and things like open chain knee extension and like progressive loading, because we did things like that for a couple of weeks, as well as like power training. And she wanted to get tested again like 3 weeks later. And I was like, it's it's only been a couple weeks. Like it's not just kind of don't get your hopes up too much. And we tested, and she was like at 85% already, and like so her single leg jump was almost at 82, and she went up again really quick after that. Was able to get back for the end of the season. And it's just a matter of those little things that were missing, and that little bit of extra effort that she needed to get back safely. And that was such a great example of what you talk about all the time, and what we see a lot. So that was a fun one.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's like you don't know what you don't know, and like for her, she's like, oh yeah, I feel really good, and I tell people a lot, like it's not just about feeling good, like it's like you have to test, and that's where you prove you're basically ready to go back to play. And I say this a lot. I think a big part of our job is also to a certain extent expose our athletes and show them like why you are not ready to go, and that's where the testing is so important. And also, you talk about progressive loading. It's like we have to make these exercises hard enough to expose them to feel like, do you feel a difference? Like one simple example is like a lateral heel touch. Let's say on your non-ACL side, you can touch the ground off an 18-inch box, but on your ACL side, you can only do a 12-inch box. Like that alone right there should tell you that you're not ready to go. Like little things like that, I feel like go a long way. And even doing like plyos, like if they, if you're doing like a single leg hop and they have a compensation on every single hop on the ACL side, again, you're not ready to go, regardless of the quantity of being able to get to 90% hop, which a lot of people can. And that's where I'm again, these details end up making a huge difference as far as like giving these kids the best chance to go back and being healthy. And we tell every kid that comes in the door, like we can't guarantee you that you won't get hurt again, and we can't guarantee that you won't tear your ACL again. We've had re-tears before, but our statistical re-tear rate is significantly lower than the industry average, and that comes down to testing basically. Sometimes it's bad luck, sometimes it's a bad contact injury. It happens. And two off the top of my head that I can think of that re-tear were like contact injuries. So it's tough when you hear kids re-tear, but we never want them to be like, oh, I wasn't prepared well enough. And when you think back to your specific young girl, like had she gone back, like would she be at risk of hurting herself? And the answer is yes, because she was testing below that 90%. But thankfully, you were able to rehab her. And I remember you having this conversation with me because I remember you were like shocked about how well she progressed. But again, that's what testing is for, right? That's why you have these pieces of equipment to test and retest to show these patients you're at 75 now. Test in a month, you're at 80 and then 84, and it's all about this slow and gradual progression. And that's the whole spectrum of what ACL rehab is. Like nobody jumps from, 60% strength to 85% in 2 weeks. Like it's just a slow and steady climb, getting back to that, ideally over 90, even hopefully closer to 95%. But yeah, those are the big things that I think that people who want to work with ACLs need to be able to understand. So I'm glad that you were to pick that up. Harry, just to kind of wrap up, my final question for you is, what advice do you have for students? Obviously, you in a sense almost lived out the dream, and maybe a dream that you didn't even think was a possibility. Like you made this big, very very unique clinical rotation your essentially your dream job. But yeah, can you kind of shed some light for maybe some students who maybe want to go down this similar path that you did?
Yeah, and I definitely had a lot of luck involved as well, and I feel really fortunate to be in the position that I am. But really the main thing that I try to tell, I have like some friends that are still in school, and like I try to tell them, I got kind of passionate about this while I was in school because it's kind of a frustrating time. Like you're learning about a lot of stuff that you're not going to use. You're spending a lot of money to learn that stuff, and it's kind of like I felt kind of stagnant a lot during PT school. But you also realize too that this is the last time in your life that your only job is to learn. Like that's the only time, the last time that's all you have to do. And you're fortunate enough to be like going through school during a time where there's so much information that's free and out there for you to go learn on your own. So if you're frustrated with like what school is and learning about hospital stuff or whatever you're not interested in when it comes to PT, there's so much out there for free. There's people that are doing exactly what you dream of doing in your career, and they're posting all about it on Instagram and talking about it on podcasts and writing free blogs about it. So it's all out there for you, and I tried to take as much advantage of that as I could when I was in school, and I think it helped me a ton. I mean, there's free like student mentorships you can go to. There's people that you can kind of network with and talk to. So there's so many opportunities to learn outside of a PT school classroom. So my advice is to take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's definitely good advice. And I think that, you and I went to PT school at different times. I went to school seven some years before you. So it was a little bit of a different time. PT social medias weren't really a thing. And I say that all the time because it really wasn't. Teddy was like one of the first, and I believe he started in like 2015, something like that, which is the year I graduated. And then all of a sudden now, like everywhere you look, somebody has a PT Instagram, which is great. It's cool just to see how far it's come from even when I started mine back in 2017, something like that. It's cool just because there's so much information out there, like you said. I will say the one caveat is that be aware of some of the stuff you see, because not everything you see on social media is legit. And I tell people, even the stuff that I post, like if something doesn't make sense to you, don't take whatever I say as truth. I obviously try to be as evidence based as possible. But even some of the exercises that I posted before, like I've had peers call me out and be like, "Yeah, you're right. That's not a useful exercise, so I don't do it anymore." And it's all about growth. It's all about continued learning. And yes, in your situation or as a student, your job is to basically get decent enough grades to pass and then eventually pass the boards. But after you become a PT, as far as like what separates like a mediocre PT with a PT that is better is the fact that those are the ones who continue learning. I worked at my previous job, 15 therapists total, something like that. And like, if I were to guess, like probably only 3 or 4 of them like legitimately actually cared about continued learning. The rest of them were doing like rubbing lacrosse balls on people, doing e-stim, ultrasound, heat packs, like that kind of stuff, like using the techs for 80% of the treatments. Like that's the setting that I used to work in. And there's a reason why like I felt myself kind of spiraling downward because you almost it's like what they say, that you become the average of the 10 people you spend the most time with. And then you come to Healthy Ball, like everyone there is like hungry, learning. And that's the big thing for me, is that like Teddy said that from the beginning, like keep learning, keep challenging. And thankfully he was able to set up those meetings. And now we still have weekly meetings, talking about articles or cases or whatever it is. And even just like sometimes we're just at lunch talking about, different cases that we have. And I think that it's cool because all of us, the 6 of us, just all want to get better and all want to learn, which is again, a very unique environment to be in. But yeah, hopefully for especially for you students who are listening, hopefully you guys found learn some things from just Harry's experience as a student. And a lot of times like we think that whatever the quote unquote dream can't happen, but Harry made it happen, and he's, and I say the same thing about me. Like there was absolutely nothing special about me, but, and I will say the one thing I really agree with what Harry said is that there is some luck involved, because Teddy took a chance on me, opened the door for me. And then for Harry, like, we could have picked a different student to come to Healthy Ball to have this rotation, but, thankfully we chose Harry and it worked out pretty well for him. So yeah, for any student, like I was, one of the big things is that like find a rotation that you feel like can really challenge you and really help you grow, especially if it's a setting that you really want to work in. Harry grew up playing sports, played sports in college, and, wanted to be around athletes. So he searched, he looked, he was like, can I please go to Healthy Baller? And again, thankfully that worked out, because I feel like some schools kind of just be like, oh yeah, can you go here because we already have a contract, blah, blah, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, you get stuck in some place that maybe you see like 1 or 2 athletes a week, if you're lucky. So yeah, that's the kind of things that I encourage students to really push for. You're the ones paying the tuition to go there. So hopefully your school can accommodate and help you find a setting that you really want to work in. And that also applies for neuro, acute care, all that kind of stuff. Like whatever setting it is, like try and find it. If you want to work with prosthetics, like try and find a facility that does a lot of that kind of stuff, or amputees. Like those clinics exist. You just have to go looking for them, and hopefully your schools will help you guys find them. But yeah, I appreciate you guys listening to today's episode, and hopefully you guys learned a little bit from Harry's experience. And thank you for coming on the show, Harry.
All right. Thanks, Wesley. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching today's video. Please feel free to like and subscribe and share it on your social media platforms. If you're interested, I have started an ACO Mastermind group, which is a growing library of content centered around ACO rehab. It has exercises ranging from immediate post-op to late-stage sport-specific movements and everything in between. It's a growing library and currently holds over 250 videos. There's content centered around assessments, movement breakdowns, exercise breakdowns, case studies, and a whole lot more. You also gain access to a private forum where you can engage with like-minded people, ask questions, share research articles, and share resources. If you're interested, please feel free to click the link below. Thank you for watching.